There is no question that Christianity is under attack. In fact, the evidence shows that Christianity now is on the decline, certainly in Western countries. But can Christianity ever be destroyed? Is it now in its death throes? Let's take a look. This is Beyond the Cover with your host, Gary Benoit. And today we have with us Selwyn Duke, longtime contributor to the New American magazine, who recently, or I should say most recently, has written the cover story article for our December 26th issue entitled Enduring Faith. Now, in this article, Selwyn, you obviously recognize that Christianity is under attack, and obviously recognize, too, that some people may view Christianity as being in its death throes. Why are you so optimistic?
Well, for one thing, Gary, if you want to put it very simply, is we believe on this rock God has built his church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But let's get a little more specific. If we look at history, I mean, Christianity has been around for 2,000 years. And as G.K. Chesterton pointed out, it died, quote unquote, on 5 different occasions, but it rose again from the dead. And that happens because a lie has speed, but truth has endurance. So I take a longer view of things. I understand that there are ebbs and flows of history, and I understand that when people become too fat and comfortable, so to speak, they will tend to lose their faith, but then they start to suffer and they find faith again. And I think we also should remember something. We talk about how faith is dying, but really it's only dying in the West. And what goes along with that, though, is that the West, unfortunately, is dying. But if you look at faith worldwide, and professional demographers have told us this for a long time, Gary, actually, it's poised to increase over the next few decades. A higher percentage of the world will be theists 30, 35 years from now than are today. And that's partially because atheistic people, secular people, just don't reproduce all that much. They're not having very many kids. And not only that, not only is religion in general growing, because a lot of people are going to say, well, a lot of that is going to be growth in Islam, and that's absolutely true. But according to what I read, the statistics just a few years ago, even consider Catholicism. It was, and probably still is, growing at a rate that's slightly in excess of the rate of population growth. So again, worldwide, faith is on the increase. But the biggest thing is, again, the truth will out. And it is the truth, and you can't kill the truth. Right. You can fight it and end up killing yourself, committing suicide, but you can't kill the truth.
And of course, there is a fundamental difference between truth and falsehood. Not just obviously that one is true and the other is false, but the fact that there is something about the truth, that there's something that is enduring about it. And if one person has a truth, another person has to rely on falsehood or deception in a fair fight, who would win?
Yeah, well, over the long term, it's the person who adheres to truth. And again, this is where you do have to take that longer view. Leftists are fond of saying about people such as ourselves, well, you're on the wrong side of history when they talk about our views on sexual matters or other things, social justice, as they put it. But what they do is they confuse history with current events. There's a very big difference. We may be on the wrong side of current events. That much is true. But we're not on the wrong side of history because, again, the truth will out. And that's what has to be remembered. And that's what people should take heart in.
And of course, current events can change. And I think that is really important to keep in mind that people make history. And it is true, as you pointed out, that if you look at the situation today, yes, it does appear that the West is dying. But if people were to return to the faith of their fathers, and if people were to get involved in the freedom movement, which of course ultimately depends not just on what happens politically, but ultimately it's a cultural battle because the culture will determine what happens politically. And if good people do get involved, why can't the current trends change?
Yeah, no, I mean, they certainly could. And look, you always have to be hopeful and you always have to fight the good fight. As G.K. Chesterton once said, there's nothing like a good fight. Yes, a lot of us might say, well, it would be great if we lived in more faithful times, and there is beauty in that, and that's the ideal, but there's also a positive to the time we're living in right now. What Chesterton said, and there's supposedly an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Well, it's not really a Chinese curse, but these are interesting times, and we can fight the good fight. And listen, there's also beauty, I have this in my article, in knowing you know the truth, in being someone who has sureness of what reality is in a sea of doubters. That's really a beautiful thing, Gary. That
It really
has to be
is.
remembered. Yeah. You know, I like to say, well, they have this saying, might makes right. I say right makes might. If you know that you're not just correct in some people's eyes, but you're eternally correct, that you're walking with God or doing the best job you can, that enlivens you. It gives you tremendous strength. And it's really a very beautiful thing. So we're living in a time where we can be the salt of the earth, where we can really try to make things better, where there's a lot of work to be done. You know, we don't just have to sit around. We can say, hey, this is a target-rich environment, as you like to put it.
Right.
There's a lot we can do. So that's really the bright
Right.
side. And
Now, we do have
I just
people
have to
who,
tell, yeah, go ahead.
feel that it's hopeless. There are people who feel despair, but I wonder if those people have reflected that even though the times today are certainly bad, I can think of worse times. And one example I like to point to, in fact, I think it's in your article, is if we were to go back to pagan Rome and consider when Christianity was basically in the catacombs. Christians were being lit up to provide light to the streets of Rome. They were tortured by being burned to death. They were put in the Colosseums. And Christianity at the time was in its infancy. But Rome, of course, was the most powerful empire in the history of the world as of that time. And who would have imagined that Christianity, instead of being destroyed, would have survived, and not just survived, but flourished? And who would imagine that one day this Roman Empire would have adopted Christianity as its official religion? So looking at that, why do we feel so? Why do we feel today like it's so hopeless?
Yeah. Well, humans, as you know, Gary, are emotional beings, and it's hard
Mm-hmm.
to get past our emotions. We're put upon, we see the direction in which the world is going, that America is falling from grace, of course, relative to what it once was. But yes, when you take that longer view, what you say is absolutely accurate. I mean, the Romans used to call the Christians haters of humanity because the Christians wouldn't participate in their pagan Roman festivals. And of course, we're seeing similar things today. We act contrary to the spirit of the age, the left-wing spirit of the age. So again, we're called haters. And this has happened. It's been a recurring theme all throughout history. We saw during the French Revolution, for instance, that the French revolutionaries actually created a new calendar with 10-day weeks that omitted the Lord's Day because they were trying to eliminate Christianity. We saw later in history, in 1926, I think it was, in Mexico with the Cristeros War, where they persecuted clergy and they tried to damage the church back then in Mexico. We saw what happened with the Spanish Revolution, the Spanish Civil War, where the Popular Front government persecuted Christians and told lies about them. And of course, the same thing happened with the Nazis. They actually created their own version of, quote, Christianity, which they called positive Christianity, which held that Jesus was a Nordic character who had been persecuted by a Jewish establishment. And the idea was to supplant genuine Christianity with that as an interim phase or a transitional phase on the way to their paganism. We saw the same thing with the Soviets, where they created something they called scientific atheism. But the thing to remember here, Gary, as you know, is that the Roman Empire is gone. Those Mexican revolutionaries of the 20s are gone. The Nazis are gone. That Popular Front government from Spain is gone. The Soviets are gone. The church remains. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of that show, you probably don't know it, obscure reference, Bully Beatdown, where some supposed bully is going to get his comeuppance and he goes into the ring to fight an MMA fighter because he thinks he can take him, because he thinks he's so tough, he's the biggest thing around. And of course, he always ends up chewing on the mat. It's the same thing here. Christianity is undefeated. And When our leftists, our secularists oppose it and try to destroy it, all they're really doing is they're volunteering to become Christianity's next vanquished foe. They can't win because God has already won because he's outside of time. Everything to him is now. So the victory is now, and we just have to fight within our perspective, within our context where we perceive time, to do the best we can. And knowing, having the hope that in the end, hey, we're going to be the last man standing.
Right. Now, you mentioned Nazism, and I'm really glad you brought up the Nazis because people often think in terms of the Nazis persecuting the Jews and the Holocaust and you know that horrible evil where millions of people were killed, were exterminated by the Nazis because they were Jewish. And you know that's something we should never forget and should make sure that never happens again. But much fewer people know that Hitler was not only anti-Jewish, he was also anti-Christians. And you know, certainly, if the Nazi regime had extended longer than it did, that would have become more and more obvious. That Hitler was against Christianity as well as the Jewish religion. And when we talk about the Jewish religion, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I know in your family background, you have a Jewish ancestry, although you are a Christian today. But certainly the Jewish religion predates Christianity. And certainly Christianity is a religion that has incorporated Jewish documents such as the Ten Commandments.
Right. Well, what you say about the Nazis is absolutely true, and it bears elaboration. You know, you have to remember, Hitler reportedly stated, quote, Christianity is the biggest trick the Jews ever played on Western civilization. And actually, there was this head at the time of the Rutgers University Holocaust Studies Center. Her name was Mandel, and this was years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago now. She uncovered OSS documents. The OSS was the precursor of the CIA that outlined the Nazis' plan to destroy Christianity. And she was Jewish, Mandel, and she was really not taken aback, but she certainly noted this, I guess, with a little surprise. Wow, they weren't just anti-Jewish, but they were trying to destroy Christianity as well. And look, you know as well as I do why that happens. It's because if you're a statist government, you want to be people's highest power. You want your laws to be preeminent. And if people worship the highest power, the God, the one true God, then you can never be that. You can never have the worship that you crave. And the kind of people we're talking about, they're often very narcissistic. They do want to be worshiped. And not only that, they want, like I said, their laws to be preeminent. But if people are putting God's laws first, then when the state's laws conflict with God's laws, what are the people going to do? Well, they're going to disobey the state's laws. So this is why Christianity has always been the greatest foe of big, intrusive, tyrannical statist governments. That's why Stalin tried to destroy it as well. I mean, that's why you saw all of this anti-Christian agitprop, like when they tried to demonize Pope Pius XII as Hitler's pope, which we now know is actually not true. There was a rabbi, David Dahlin was his name, who wrote the book, The Myth of Hitler's Pope. He exploded that myth. And in fact, talking about the Nazis' true spiritual orientation, do note that Pope Pius XII, at one point, when he was inveighing against the Nazis, described them, just as a matter of course, as aggressive neo-pagans and also as leftists. He said, you know, Hitler may fool a lot of people, I'm paraphrasing now, but at the end of the day, we're going to find out he's just another radical leftist like the rest of the Nazis.
Right. Now, of course, we're at a period of the calendar where Christmas is approaching. It's Christmas time right now. And what do you have to say regarding Christmas and the hope that that provides?
Yeah, well, of course, it's our second highest holy day, and we should treat it as such. And we should also understand that we should approach Christmas, as you know, with regard for its true meaning. It's become too commercialized, as you know, too materialistic. Nothing wrong with gift giving, but don't forget that true meaning. It's very, very important. Excuse me. And in accordance with this, we also have to remember that we should never take God off our lips, out of our minds, and out of our hearts, which has happened. Too many of us, even if we go to church 1 hour a week, but that's it. And we have to ask, well, do we say grace over meals with our family? Do we talk about God sometimes with our kids? These things are very important. When departing, do we say God bless to people? Now, these things are important, Gary, because we may complain about the secularization of our society, the attack upon Christianity, but if God is not on our lips, in our minds, and in our hearts, then we're part of the problem, aren't we?
Right.
We really are guilty of mistakes of omission. So we have to remember this really starts with the people. And yes, Christmas is coming up. It's a beautiful time, and it's a beautiful time to start that recognition of what I just said, and that worship, that celebration of the true spirit of Christmas.
Of course, you said there's nothing wrong with gift giving, and that's absolutely true. But let's consider the gifts. Like a yacht, for example, not bad in and of itself, but if somebody focuses on that too much and doesn't fulfill his responsibilities, that could become a bad thing. But how about the most important gifts? And how about the gift of life that we have from God, that is God-given? And how about the gift we got on the original Christmas, December 25, 2,000 years ago, that baby in the cradle?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the gift of God's grace, that's very significant too, right? God's power that can come into us and that can allow us to overcome sin. That's a beautiful thing. And that's something we should be praying for, and we should pray that others get it. And talking about these gifts, I'll quote something else G.K. Chesterton said. He said, "A man is tallest when he's on his knees."
Yes.
That's a good way to put it, isn't it? And it really is true. People will sometimes say, I've heard this. In fact, I heard it recently in the New American Comments section, a version of it. They'll say, well, why would God want you to worship him? They think that sounds egotistical or something. And it's not that God needs us to worship him. It's that he knows we need to worship him. That's what he knows, because when we don't worship the God who is far above us and vastly superior, what we start to do is often we make ourselves God. Human egos can become very, very big. You start to look down on others, then you can't see that which is above you and is vastly superior. So yes, we need to worship God. I know I'm quoting Chesterton a lot, but as he also said, a truly great man knows that he is not God, and the greater he is, the better he knows it. You're going to know that better and better the more and more you worship God, because the more you worship him, the closer you get to him, then you realize how perfect he is and how we pale in comparison, but nonetheless, also how we are special because we're his children, and how we can become true children of God by walking in his ways and accepting his grace and starting to align our own will with his more and more.
Anyway, that's beautiful, and I think that's a wonderful way to end this program. Selwyn, thank you so much. We always get so much out of your articles, and also when we interview you.
Well, same here. Love to be with you, Gary.
For those who would like to visit Selwyn's article, we'll have a link to that in the description for this interview. God bless you,
Gary.
Selwyn.
God bless. God
Okay.
bless you.
Thank you very much.